Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of Modern Work Mondays for Retail. I am your host, Nolan Wheeler, and as always, I have with me
Jeff Strasser from Microsoft. How you doing, Nolan? Good to see you.
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm great.
Excellent, excellent. So today we got a cool topic. I've been enamored by this conversation lately around something that was introduced to me called survivorship bias. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just share the screen because I think this image is just such a cool image to talk about while we look at it. But survivorship bias comes around this whole idea whereby when during World War II, planes were returning to base and they were, unfortunately had some impact damage from bullets and any aircraft failure or warfare, and they were reinforcing all these areas that were damaged. And it took them a while, but they then started to realize, we have to think about this on the inverse. We need to start actually reinforcing the areas whereby we don't see bullet holes, because those are the planes that don't return. And it seems so evident and obvious as the armchair quarterback looking at this now, fuselage, no bullet holes, motors, no bullet holes.
Yeah.
But that was around this idea here. And that was the topic of conversation to say, we have so much data in retail and frontline work. We look at so many things that we know to the obvious, right? Like NPS scores we look at, right? And I would argue that that's mostly people who are either super loyal and happy or super mad and want to make a point or want to win a $500 gift card. I just don't like that sample size in those spaces. We look at POS transaction data and we say, well, it's busier here, so let's add more cashiers. But I want to have this conversation with you about what technologies and approaches can you use on survivorship bias to identify the things that we don't know, to actually start making some assumption-based decision making based on the negatives that are happening.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I love the airplane photo because it does. I mean, there is a strange parallel here to really, and it's not just a retail thing. It's to any enterprise success and the metrics that you're looking at and how do you improve the overall performance, right? Typically, we're measuring the same things, and we do more of the things that are working, but we don't know why things aren't working, and we don't know that they're not working because we're not measuring them and we're not inspecting them. And so what are the gaps in the business that could expose that? And usually, it's hard to just measure and track everything, but it's the nice thing about retail is there's enough experiences that people have, whether they're customers or they're employees going into other stores or leaders within the field having experiences in their stores or sending out a group of kind of secret shoppers to document their experiences that can highlight the things we do need to look into. And so one example, kind of carrying over our conversation, I believe it was from last week, was last week or maybe there's the week before your Ring doorbell purchasing experience, where there were four employees having conversations over the radios. If you mentioned, if a district manager came into that store and that was their experience, they would probably blow a gasket on that experience. High ticket items, lost sale, four employees taking 25, 30 minutes. So what's the opportunity cost of other work they could have been doing or other customers they could have supported, and the data there or the technologies that exist to start to identify that we talked about briefly would be something like tracking the radio conversations. And had they known what these people are doing, and there are other technologies, whether it's computer vision in the stores and kind of monitoring where people are working within the stores and those sorts of things, but voice and radio and the fact that we have this communication channel and we can now interpret what people are saying using generative AI tools to bring these conversations together and surface to leaders, whether it's in the field or in corporate, kind of what's working, what's not, and then start digging into the areas that we never looked at before. And these are ones where we're missing sales and you would never know by point of sale data, by inventory data. You would have no idea that no one's experience missed out on $500 worth of sales that day, because the things that would have exposed that were not things that the business was looking at.
Yeah. So selfishly, some of this will be the stuff that we do, but unselfishly and trying to be unbiasedly, there's a lot of other things out there. There's so many cool things that can be leveraged, right? There are you just talked about AI radio and listening to either push to talk digital channels or regular two-way radio devices. I mean, I think that's actually one of the best co-pilot use cases for frontline work, not just for retail, but hospitality, construction. I mean, it's like buying a Volkswagen. You don't think there's very many out there, but then once you start looking for Volkswagens, they're everywhere. It's like radios. You just will see radios everywhere. If you start to be cognizant and looking for them, it's incredible how many of those devices are out there. And there's actually good reason. They're not as terrible as some people think they are. Then it looks at there's IoT devices to look at, load cells in basket stand sensors to say, hey, there's no baskets, hey, there's no buggies. I mean, I don't know why. And maybe I got a bad store I shop to. It's my favorite store, so I don't think it's a bad store. But I would say like one out of every 25 to 35 times I go shopping, there's no hand baskets there. And I'm a good lad. I just go to the end of the till and grab one, and they fulfill them. But little things you just don't know about in terms of some of those conditions in stores. I've actually heard as well about a company, and I have a bit of a creepy factor on it, but they're promiscuously listening to conversations at the POS and promiscuously listening at like the deli counter, not only for looking at lost sales opportunities, but maintaining training establishments, making sure that they're presenting with upselling, making sure that they're asking the customer at the POS for loyalty and rewards and those pieces. So, what are those other things that, I'm sure you're going to go probably computer vision or something, but what are the other things that we can do to try to augment the survivorship bias?
Yeah, no, those are great examples. I love maybe love is a tricky one. I mean, I do think listening, kind of that listening into those conversations does expose where there are gaps in the business. So, those are the types of things that aren't happening today, and the conversations and the data points that aren't necessarily being tracked that can expose problems in the business. Yeah, you mentioned computer vision is a great way with now the kind of the cost of the technology is coming down and the improvements in the processing and image recognition side of things to understand what's going on in the stores, people movement, product movement. We've talked about in the past about bringing robotics into that to kind of analyze what's happening within the store or merchandising or things like that in more real time than the occasional visit from a vendor or a DM or other leader in the field. So I think there's a number of things that can be done, but the first thing that has to be done is to identify what are the things we need to measure that we're not measuring today, and where are those potential risks, and then you can build the solutions around them. I mean, we're in an amazing world where you can pretty much use technology to measure, build, track, analyze almost anything. There's always going to be a cost versus return element of that, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's funny. This is a story from like 5 years ago, but I was working with a group of franchisees, and one of them said, "I want a big red button at my exit, and some signage that says, 'Did you not buy, or are you mad?' or something like that, right?" And kind of a funny group of characters. I really like them. Just kind of like tongue in cheek, like, "Are you pissed?" And everybody said, "You're crazy. That is the scariest technology. I would never put that in my store. I don't." The thing would that button would be hit all day. And it was like, well, that's my point. Like my point is that this is where we're at, and what are we going to do to try to like recognize this? And that was 5 years ago. Really thinking about survivorship bias, was people do like happy or not, and they do like that whole thing and whatnot. It was just like his idea was like, I want some big, nuclear button that you hit when you leave, and that could be like this new data point. We never ended up doing anything like that, but it's pretty interesting. Not only the idea, but the response from the peers, which was that's terrifying.
Well, and if you if the leaders in the business make the focus of, hey, we're going to spend the first month just collecting the baseline, and then the goal is just to make it better. It could be 10 taps of that button a month. It could be 1,000 taps of that button a month. But if you reduce it by 5% a month, yep, that's a win. But nobody's looking at it.
Yeah. So kind of interesting. Anyways, I think that's where we'll wrap that one up. So hopefully a little bit of learning on survivorship bias. Feel free to get that drawing. Anybody who's watching, it's just sitting on Wikipedia, and it's a great article to read about survivorship bias. And then, let's start thinking more about the technology that we can leverage to generate some of this data that maybe we don't want to hear, but it's probably the most novel, and it's probably the most valuable data we can get in our store. very rarely learn anything from yes and good job. I learn everything from no and bad job. So that's kind of where this
Absolutely.
goes.
Absolutely right. Totally agree.
Cool. All right, buddy. Well, have a
Great.
great week. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.